An ex-middle school teacher is sentenced to 30 years in prison after having sex with her 8th grade student inside a classroom. She got to know this 14-year-old at an after-school program, later plied him with alcohol and drugs, and then had sex with him more than 20 times. 32-year-old Melissa Curtis has now been convicted on 3 counts of third-degree sexual offense, but the fallout from her case is far from over. I'm Gillespie, and this is Law&Crime News. This is a story we first told you about last year, when our very own Jesse Weber broke down the case on Sidebar. It was back then, in October 2023, when an investigation into Melissa Curtis was first opened. Officials in Maryland got a tip from a now adult man reporting that he had a sexual relationship with Curtis when he was only 14. This was back in 2015 when Curtis was 22 years old and a teacher at Lakelands Park Middle School. That's in Gaithersburg, Maryland, about 25 miles northwest of DC. That school year, Curtis volunteered to organize an after-school program, and that's where she got to know the victim. According to police, they had a lot of one-on-one time together during all this, and that's when the relationship crossed the line. In all, Curtis and the 8th grade student had sex more than 20 times over a months-long period. They had sex at the school, inside classrooms, inside of Curtis's car, and even at the teenager's house. The victim told investigators Curtis also gave him alcohol and marijuana while their so-called relationship was ongoing. These sexual interactions went on for months until things finally ended in April of 2015. Curtis left the Montgomery County Public School District in 2017 after having worked there for 2 years. That's where everything ended for nearly a decade until this victim came forward to police last fall. He described their interactions, detailed their sexual encounters, and noted he was only 14 years old at the time. On October 31st, 2023, a warrant was issued for Curtis's arrest. A week later, on November 7th, 2023, she turned herself in. At the time, Curtis faced charges of sexual abuse of a minor and multiple counts of 3rd and 4th degree offenses. It wasn't until June 20th of this year that Curtis pleaded guilty, and just this month, she was sentenced. Formally, Curtis received a 30-year sentence, but she won't actually spend that much time behind bars. All but 12 months of that sentence was suspended, meaning Curtis will only serve 1 year in prison. After her release, she'll be on supervised probation for 5 years. At that point, she'll also have to register as a sex offender for 25 years, and she has restrictions about seeing kids too. The only children she'll be allowed to be around alone are her own kids. Other than that, all her contact with children will have to be supervised. Hey, a lot of you watching this may be business owners or even thinking of starting your own side hustle. I want to introduce you to our sponsor, Odoo, which is a free all-in-one business management software with tools to help you run your business. I'm a dog owner and decided to build my dog Dash his own website using Odoo's website builder. It literally took minutes thanks to Odoo's easy tools like AI copywriting and drag and drop features. 5 minutes later, and now we have dashthedog.com. You can start building your site right now and get a free domain for the first year with our link odoo.com/lcnews10 to try Odoo for free. Okay, so we're joined now by trial attorney Christa Ramey to take a closer look at this disturbing case. But Christa, thanks for coming on with us today.
Thank you so much for having me again.
So let's start with the most recent thing, the fact that this teacher, ex-teacher I should say, Melissa Curtis, was sentenced to 30 years, but she'll only serve 12 months, a year behind bars. Can you explain that part to me?
I was stunned when I saw that, quite honestly. I thought I originally read it as 30 years, and then I was like, oh no, all but 12 months suspended. Meaning she is only going to serve 12 months and then only 5 years of probation following that. Now, if she screws up in those 6 years, the 1 year in prison or the 5 years in probation, the whole 30 is on the table. So she can't, have any relapses. So, there is at least that hammer in the background. But I was quite surprised. And there has to be some, something, extraordinary that I just didn't see in the stories I read that was presented to the court that maybe could explain that. but she was very young at the time. She was like a 22-year-old teacher, and it was a middle school student. So, this is a young kid. And I would think that 12 months is a little light on what she will serve ultimately. So, yes, I was stunned.
I was shocked by that too, because again, I saw the 30, thought it was going to be 30, and now she only has this 1 year. But after all of this, when she is eventually released, she will have to register as a sex offender for 25 years. And you said she's going to be on probation for 5. What will all of that look like? For the bulk of the rest of her life, almost, she is labeled as this sex offender. How does that change things for her?
Yeah, I was even thinking about that as I was reading that myself. And, how this works, she cannot have any unsupervised contact with children ever again. So her vocation was a teacher. And how does she develop and get close to a child to allow this kind of contact to develop? That is that one-on-one time where that grooming happens. So she cannot have any more time alone with a child ever, only with other people present, except for her own children. And, I guess there's not really much a court can do to interfere with that, your own children. That proclivity is a different type of mental condition, that only a unique few have, fortunately. So any friends and family, they're going to know. You open up one of those sex offender apps, I've got, a bunch of crime apps on my phone. It tells me when there's alerts in the neighborhood, but it also tells me how many sex offenders are nearby me at any given moment. One of them will be her if I was in Maryland.
You mentioned about the one-on-one time. So if we're looking at the crime itself, it happened because this teacher and the then 14-year-old student were spending some time after school together, one-on-one, alone. And you mentioned grooming too. I really always have to wonder, how does it jump from this student-teacher relationship? She's in a position of power to she's having sex with this 14-year-old more than 20 times. I mean, that's a pretty big leap.
Yeah. So what happens typically is, it doesn't just go from, I'm your teacher and now we're having sex. A trust has to develop over time. So what happens is, and this is what, other people should be looking out for when they see this conduct with teachers, doctors, priests, whoever it is that is surrounding themselves with the little ones. And it is alone time, special gifts that they give that they don't give to others, extravagant sometimes. I've had cases where the teachers have given tickets to, basketball games. You want to go to the Warriors game? Let's go, but that doesn't happen for all of the students. Rides home. Mom, don't worry, I got it. I have to go by your house anyway. I'll drop little, Jimmy off on my way home as well. No, a teacher is not permitted ever under any set of circumstances to give a child a ride home. That special tutoring that might occur that is, on the weekends or at weird hours. So you're just kind of looking for that time. Oftentimes teachers are alone with children and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But it's just when you start looking at this special contact that they are giving to any given student that you have to begin to question what's going on. And then over time that develops into, inappropriate touching. That will be pretty innocent at first, whether it's just an arm around a shoulder or, a slap on the leg, or, a little, grab of the face, whatever it might be. And then it just kind of progresses from there until the child feels comfortable. And, you're talking about a 14-year-old boy. So this is a child that is, going through probably puberty at this moment and starting to develop these feelings and, urges himself. And this is someone who he trusts, who parents tell their kids, trust your teacher, trust your doctor, trust your priest, trust your, police officer. So they're in that trusted corner, right? And so this is how those things begin to happen over time.
You talked about special treatment. You mentioned potentially giving these students extra things. And in this case, she'd actually given him alcohol and marijuana. And again, remember, this boy is in 8th grade. He's 14 years old. He can't even drive yet. How does all of that factor in? I mean, does that make it all the more worse?
Well, and it's part of that loosening the child up. You see that in sex offender cases across the board. You and I have talked about Sean Combs before. That is, what he did. He loosened his victims up with alcohol and drugs. You see that with priests. It's the communion wine that they give the altar boys when they're alone in private, because you have to drink that wine. It can't be thrown out because it's been converted to the blood of Christ. but then you're giving it to the child. I mean, how perverted is that? So this is kind of part of that process. It's that drugs and alcohol are part of loosening that child up, making that child feel more comfortable and relaxed. And therefore, it's easier for her to do what she wants to do ultimately with this child.
It really is so disturbing to think about, especially when you're painting that picture of getting this kid tipsy or drunk so their inhibitions are lower. They might do something that they ordinarily wouldn't do. It's really just hard to hear. But in this case, the person was 14 when it happened, and they didn't come forward until they were an adult, almost 10 years later when they came forward and said, hey, this is what happened. Why do you think it might have taken such a long time for this person to feel comfortable breaking the news about what happened with him and his teacher?
This is something that is common across the board with sex abuse survivors. So you often hear that criticism of, oh, now when, 10, 15, 20 years later, they come and this is about a lawsuit or a payday or whatever it might be. But in reality, there's trauma responses. So let's talk about that. It's flight, fear, fawn, or freeze. Those are the common trauma responses. And you've got to protect yourself. You've got to put yourself in a position where I don't want anything to happen to me anymore. So a lot of times what happens is then that kind of goes to the back of the brain. You're not thinking about it regularly, and you kind of push it out as a memory. So you oftentimes talk to survivors of childhood sex abuse, and they don't really come to terms with it until they're in their 30s or 40s, and sometimes even later in life. There was recently a case against Bill Cosby that was tried out here in Santa Monica. The woman was, I think, 16 or 17 years old at the Playboy Mansion when Bill Cosby molested her. And she was in her 60s, I believe, when she finally came forward. So you really have to think about it in the context of the kids thinking that they did something wrong, that they put themselves in this position. They don't want to get in trouble. That's a big thing. Sex with kids, you're going to get in trouble anyway, right? With mom and dad. That's what they're thinking. But they're not thinking, no, this is not the type of thing you will get in trouble for. And parents need to remember that as well. Create an environment where your child feels comfortable to come to you when they're in trouble, and know that they're not going to get into trouble from you because they've come to you. So that is another factor that kind of lays into it. So there's shame, guilt, trauma responses are all kind of factored into that.
We know the defendant in this case has been convicted. She is going to serve her now 12 months. But what about any potential lawsuits, the civil side of things against the school? Could this survivor come forward and sue her? What would that look like?
So here in California, and I'm not sure of the statute of limitations in Maryland, but you're seeing this trend across the country. So I would not be surprised if you have statute of limitations lifted for periods of time where there's look back windows right now in a lot of states. In California now, any molestation that occurs with a child after January of this year, there's no statute of limitations. But before that, it was 40th birthday, 18 years plus 22 years. So when they reach the age of the majority, then they have another 22 years to file. What could happen here is looking at the school for liability. So was there any of that grooming occurring that other teachers would have seen, which administrators would have seen, and no one said anything? Was there signs? Were there other students that she molested? I promise you that there are probably other students that she molested, because this never just happens once in a vacuum. That's just not how these things work. They find it's exciting to them, thrilling. They find a new victim a year or two later. And so after this one goes on to the next school. So the schools could be responsible for lack of supervision, lack of training, hiring, retention of this teacher. There could have been red flags in her portfolio before she came, although she was 22. So she probably came there right after college. There are absolutely likelihood of liability against the school district for her conduct as well.
That's something we'll definitely have to keep an eye on to see where the case moves forward. Obviously, a long road ahead for this survivor, but some justice has been served. Christa, thank you for coming on and breaking the case down with us.
Thank you so much for having me anytime.
Maryland investigators say there may be more victims in Curtis's case, and they ask anyone with more information or any survivors to come forward. For Law and Crime, I'm Gillespie.